smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity. And make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste the Therapist. Let's go.
Hi, beautiful people. So if you've never been into my podcast before, my name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. I come on, I talk to people who are doing things to empower the lives of others by sharing their story. And you all know the goal of my podcast is to just help people kind of shift the way they think. I think a lot of times things happen in our lives, we get stuck in our trauma, and we really struggle with how to get out of it. And so like, one of the amazing opportunities that I have with this podcast is to hear from some amazing people that are sharing their story or who may be empowering people in different capacities. So believe it or not, we're at episode 285. That's like super exciting. We are streaming in over 120 countries, almost 200,000 downloads. Like, it's amazing how much this podcast has grown just through me trying to kind of help people shift their thought process and just kind of get clarity. So I'm going to bring my special guest on, and I'm going to have him introduce himself to you all. Hello, special guest. How are you?
Hey, Celeste. How are you doing?
Good. Can you introduce yourself to my audience?
Absolutely. My name's Brad Watts, and I'm a therapist working here in Virginia.
Yes, Virginia. And we have the same licensure, but it just looks different in your state because you're LPC, I'm LMHC. Yep. So that just means licensed practical clinician, right?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. And then how's the weather in Virginia right now?
It's cold, it's icy, it's snowing. So we're supposed to get, a lot more snow overnight. So, but
I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad for you all. I'm in Boston, so this is like an everyday type of deal for us in the winter.
Yeah, it's nothing for you. For us, it's a big deal.
So before we get started, I just kind of want people to know, like, the topic we're talking about today can be hard for some people. We're talking about sibling sexual abuse, and so I always like to give people a warning about some things because once we start. Sometimes people aren't ready to have some things unravel. So I want to be clear about that part, is that like this can be like a difficult conversation to talk about. So not only are you a licensed practical clinician, but you also are a CSPTO. Did I say it right?
Close. It's and I'll go ahead and give the acronym, but it's a Certified Sex Offender Treatment Provider. So we call it CSOTP. We call it C-Stop. It's just kind of a nickname, but that's what it means. And so with that, I work with families and particularly with individuals that have sexually offended adolescents. So from 12 to about 18 is the age range that I work with.
And was this a field you found yourself getting into, working with people who were offenders? Do you think that was something you was like, I want to do this work for a living?
Well, I sat in grad school, had an amazing teacher in grad school, and she talked about, I mentioned this in my book, that she loved working with sex offenders. And I remember sitting there thinking, I can work with anybody, but I just can't work with that population.
Right.
And so I came to Virginia and, interviewed at a place to work, and they said, we need you to give this a try. And I thought about that. I was like, well, she really enjoyed it. I'll give it a shot and see what that's like. And I've really enjoyed the work, obviously, during my time, working here in Virginia.
Okay. It's interesting how we kind of get into these fields where we really didn't see ourselves. I've never seen myself as a therapist growing up. I thought that if you went to therapy, you were crazy. That's how much I didn't see myself as a therapist. So it's so interesting how, you went from like, I could never work with that population, and now you're working with that population. Now, one of the areas that you specifically have been passionate about is sibling sexual abuse.
That's right.
And you call it a stigma, an epidemic in America that nobody's talking about.
Yeah.
How did you end up like specifically becoming passionate about the sibling trauma that takes place?
Well, I've been working exclusively with this population for about 5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And it just as I got in and day after day, session after session, client after client, what kept emerging was that these offenses took place in the home, between siblings. And so I started and just kind of wrote basically like a family therapy workbook, so to speak, lack of a better word. And I started presenting at different places, just regionally. Like I went down to Tennessee, places around Virginia, colleges and things. And it was always interesting to me how many people would come up and share their story. And then just as I did more and more research, just trying to be more effective as a clinician for my clients and just seeing how that happens, just how prevalent it is, yet we don't talk about it because we think about the Me Too movement and all the great work that's gone on with that. But there are so many marginalized, survivors, of sibling sexual abuse and just, it's not talked about. I talk about this in the book. It's not talked about in our national discourse, and it very rarely ever comes up. And people really don't know how to identify it. And parents don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And so these conversations with parents, it's not something that when you find out that you have one sibling or one child that offends sexually on another, you can like post on Facebook and say, hey, what do I do? Where do I go for help? So that they just feel so lost and so many feel hopeless with it. And so my whole desire has been to bring this out in the open. So, I went looking, I was like, I didn't see a book like this for parents to be able to go to as a resource. So I just wanted to present what I've learned and hopefully give some hope to people that are caught in this horrible situation. And personally, we need to talk about it. And so I appreciate you having me on, and we can have important, conversations like this so people can know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I always say you can't heal what you don't reveal. Yeah. One of the things about children is that children act out, their behaviors, the things they're struggling with, their monkey see, monkey do. Yeah. And one of the things, like I've heard a lot of stories, like this is definitely a common thing that happens in the home. But I think that a piece that we may be missing is that the abuser, like the sibling, is more than likely being abused as well. Is that something that you found to be true as you've like kind of been doing this work?
There's a lot of situations, and you just kind of go through the literature, people talking about that too, that factor that goes in. Yes, absolutely. What we're seeing now too is the role of pornography is playing more and more and more with these kids. So it used to be almost exclusively if a child or an adolescent was sexually offending, it was due to, hey, they were abused. That's where it happened. But more and more with the rise of technology, different forms of pornography, I mean, that's a huge factor.
I didn't even think about that, Brad. I didn't even think about that. With social media, having access to everything, even if there's blocks, you have people, my kids were playing Robux. I might be saying it wrong. Blux. It's a game. And, somebody it's a game for kids, but somebody created like a naked version within it. And, they have so many people that have access to kids. And, sometimes parents are not really aware of all the access that's available. So I never thought about the fact that the pornography or the things that people can see from their tablets and their phones, and they're seeing it. So then they may have a younger sibling that they may try to utilize that with. Is that what you're starting to see a lot more of?
Yeah, and that's what we see, throughout the field is that they get hooked on pornography. Usually they'll escalate into more and more deviant kinds of pornography. And then they'll think, okay, who can I act out sexually with? Who can I have sex with? Mm-hmm. Nothing comes to mind. They think, well, peers won't do that with me. Well, I've got a little brother or sister in the home. I can make them, and then I can compel them to be quiet. And so they'll do things like what we call grooming, and they'll turn around and show them pornography, talk about wanting to try that on them. They're using their relationship as a power differential. And then, a lot of times they'll bribe them, either into engaging in the sexual behavior. They then exploit their relationship by saying, hey, look, I'll be sent away, if you tell, or you don't want me to get in trouble. Right. So you can imagine as a survivor of that, as a child, going through something like that, how traumatic, that is, because then they're debating, hey, I know this is wrong. I want to tell mom or dad, but I'm afraid what's going to happen to the family. Maybe I'm afraid physically, what they'll do to me, what the older sibling will do. So it causes all kinds of traumatic effects that, can carry well into adulthood for those kids.
Wow. And so, that power dynamic is huge. Just the fact that that sibling loves their older sibling, right? But they're confused at what's happening because this isn't right. But some siblings just get used to the behavior, right? And then I know that, you start noticing their behaviors are off. When this stuff starts to come to the light, when it's kind of revealed, I'm sure there's so much chaos in the home. I want to start with, what does it look like from your experience? Because this is what you do. What does it look like from a parent's perspective when this stuff takes place and they find out, like, oh my gosh, like this is happening right under my nose?
Well, there's, and just kind of universally, parents that experience this, it's shock. I mean, of course you don't believe. I think as a parent now, I mean, you're like, this can't be happening. There must be some mistake. And so you think about disclosing that, all that it takes. And a lot of times parents want to sweep it under the rug. They're like, well, are you sure this is what happened? Or what did you do to contribute to this? And how traumatic that can be for those kids. And then, just shock. What do I do? Where do I go? Do I call the police on my own kid? So things like that can go through your mind. What's the next step? Unfortunately, a lot of parents will just try and, like I said earlier, sweep it under the rug and, hey, don't tell anybody, we're not going to do anything further. And then that's, as you can imagine, one of the worst things that you can do.
Yeah. And so, parents, I mean, this is obviously why you kind of wrote this book, this idea of like, what do I do next? Like they love both of their kids. Yeah. One of the issues that come up too is this idea of, I've heard from women who talk about their parents kind of saying like, well, what did you do? Like, how did you contribute to that? How does this affect, the parents that are responding and, to the person being abused in that way? How does it affect the victim in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, the parental response is so key, because if they'll respond in I'll say it in an appropriate way, but addressing it, a great thing to do is get a clinician involved, because then, as we know, then we're mandated reporters. You report it, you can take action, from those steps, but it's just so traumatic, for the kids. Because you're looking at, mommy and daddy don't believe what I'm saying. I'm being blamed for this. So it's like, why am I going to, push this any further? And we see a lot of kids will never disclose and go into adulthood, and they'll present to therapy with problems like substance abuse, relationship problems, workplace problems, on and on. And really the root of that cause, and a lot of those can be, hey, I was sexually abused by my older brother when I was 6, when I was 7, when I was 8.
And, I think another issue is when, the parent is not believing or taking measures to work on the healing process, the reconciliation process, is that the abuse will still go on, or the fact that this victim has to still be with their abuser and pretend like everything's fine. Like how do you think that affects the psyche where you're still like around someone that has abused you for years?
It's constantly being re-traumatized. So you show up, like what you said, at the dinner table. There you are with your abuser. everywhere you go. And particularly when mom and dad or whoever the guardians are know that. And it's like, hey, they didn't even get grounded. They didn't get punished at all for what they did to me. And then like what you were saying earlier, I'm getting blamed. It's like, well, what did you do to contribute to this? Why were you going in his room? All this victim blaming that we see, incredibly damaging. And I like survivors, I know through social media and other things have reached out to me, and just these stories going on into adulthood and, within circles, and just the prevalency of it. And sibling sexual abuse goes on for a much longer duration than any other form of sexual abuse, because it's in the home. Siblings are
Right.
easier to conceal it. And so it's that constant re-traumatization that goes on, because it can go on for years.
Yeah. One of the audience members is asking, are parents normally blamed for the child's behavior, even though they were not aware? I think people like you and I in this field and have heard the stories where I talk to my kids, right? We talk, and I'm more self-aware only because I've had the education around it, and my heart goes out to people that aren't in this field who, like, something like this happens, the guilt that comes up. Do you find that parents are typically blamed when this happens and they feel like they should have known, or people say you should have known that this was going on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's certainly a common response, is they beat themselves up because they feel like, I should have known, I should have caught the signs. How did I miss those signs? And yeah, they feel that way for sure. And this happens in all kinds of families. It happens in dysfunctional families. It happens in well-functioning families. It goes across all race lines, goes across economic status, doesn't matter. And who's going to sit there and think, oh, my kids, I've got one kid abusing the other. You just never think that. You think about kind of the creepy old guy, that maybe weirds somebody out. You're like, oh, hey, stay away from that guy. And it's a lot easier to deal with. Maybe easier isn't the right word, but when sexual abuse happens outside the family, because you can direct that anger towards that individual. But like what you mentioned earlier, you love both your kids with all your heart, and you're torn. And what happens a lot of times within the family and even the extended family is people find themselves taking sides, and it can rip families apart, as we can imagine.
Yeah. And I want to talk about what reconciliation looks like. I think I always say, if we're still breathing, there's room for change. And unfortunately, like you mentioned earlier, is that, a lot of people have come with these over issues, I want to the drinking, or my promiscuity and these different things. And then when we are going backwards, there's this story of sexual trauma that is hidden deep to the point that they're not even aware of it. And so what does reconciliation look like for a family who has gone through this type of trauma?
Yeah, I mean, it's so key that parents, separate the children, and so that they can get their own treatment. And so it can take a while, just based on where people are at. Where is the survivor at in his or her treatment? Where is the offender at in their treatment? And then coming together for what we call, family reunification sessions. And it's all really based on where people are at, and being able to do that. I've certainly seen, a lot of cases where families are able to reunify, and it takes time, and it's a lot of hard work. And that's why it's so important that parents are getting their kids into treatment. And the sooner you get them into treatment, the better. And for the offender population, those that get into specialized sex offender treatment do remarkably well. That's why I enjoy doing what I do, to see those changes. Now, when they hit 18 and over, it's a whole different ballgame. It's more about, as far as rehabilitation, it's more about containment. And we see that, in cases like, famous cases like Jerry Sandusky. We look at Larry Nassar, others, and these guys have had set patterns that they've offended for years and years and years, and racked up hundreds and hundreds of victims that they've abused. With adolescents, and a lot of it has to do with brain development. Their brains aren't as we know, aren't as developed at their age. They're not thinking through all the processes and the consequences that are going on. And so empathy training is a really big aspect of treatment, and, having them take responsibility, understanding, hey, this is how you've hurt your family. This is how you've hurt your brother or sister. And that kind of work is so crucial. And, we see, high levels of success, as a result of that. But it's a whole different ball game when you talk about adults.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for, for people listening that may have struggled through this or struggling now, the importance of getting your children the support now, because they can work through it a lot differently now, and you have a little bit more control to make sure that we're kind of doing the work than you would if they were over 18. It gets a lot harder. The behaviors are pretty much ingrained. It becomes like very ingrained in them. So it gets a little bit more challenging to do, right?
Yeah, without question. And the sooner, like what you were saying, the sooner parents can get them, into treatment, the more effective those results are going to be. But like I said, even if you get somebody in at 16 or 17, there's still a high probability of success.
How do the you talk about this empathy training? How do the kids respond? Because I think if you're watching pornography or if you're being sexually abused, you're not really thinking about somebody's emotions, or you're just kind of, again, you're just acting out what you've seen, right? How are they responding once it hits them? Like, oh my God, like I really just like hurt my sibling. Like, how does it work for them in your experience when they've come to that realization?
It can be crushing. It can be crushing. And sometimes what you'll see them get suicidal.
Damn.
and just the full impact is extremely hard, on them. And as they feel that, and then kind of come through that and understand that there is hope, that people can change. Hey, look, my family is still here for me. I put them through torture, and yet they still love me and are here. So that's why that parental involvement is so important. And obviously all parents are kind of different how they respond to that. And you're going through different stages of grief, because of it. But, being there and hanging with your kid is one of the best things you can do. And like what we talked about earlier, believing your child who's come to you and said, look, I've been sexually abused, or this is what's going on. And those are the really important things. But yeah, it hits them hard. And some of the activities I do, they'll talk about how hard it was at that point, and as they're getting ready to leave, how instrumental that was in their change. And obviously we know it's staying on that road. I mean, it's every day, that you can't want one mess up. And that's kind of it. You have to day after day, stay on that path of healthy sexuality, consent, following, the plans that we lay out, the relapse prevention and safety plans. And, for them, it means staying away from pornography, because that can light the fuse into, reoffending again. So it's so key that they stay away from that. And we really work with them on building a filter as far as it comes with sexual media. So it's not just pornography, but sexual media. What are the messages that are being sent? How are you filtering that out? It is all really key in that.
A lot of, it sounds like a lot of brain work, a lot of intentional work that, because, you could say sexual media, even though you're not watching pornography, there's still other things that are happening that could be activating that in their brain.
You got it.
I have audience member says, for offenders who truly has changed, are they able to receive the help they need to be removed from sex offenders list? So I guess a caveat to that is, if this happens, they're 10, 11, 12, 13, are they listed as a sex offender? And if yes, does that stay with them for their entire life?
That they avoid almost everything that they can to put kids on sex offender lists. But there are states that make allowance for that. You know, that
What do you mean?
Well, different depending on the nature of the sexual offense. That's open to a judge to sentence somebody with.
Got it. Okay.
So that they've got that, that it's available and at their discretion. And really, that's not what kids need at this point. You know, it's as they're older, you know, certainly that's something available and probably something that's needed at that point. But, you know, they need this opportunity to be able to change, you know, because like what we talked about, brain development is a big key, you know, understanding that it's completely different. And so we've seen, and I mentioned this in the book, just the way that some legal responses, you know, that we could use some changes as far as that goes. But yeah, I mean, so most judges, you know, won't do it outside of just really serious or heinous kinds of things, because it's, you know, the juvenile court's about, you know, really rehabilitating them, so that they can go on and lead successful lives, because that's obviously puts a mark on them going into adulthood and makes it really difficult. So if they're willing to change and move forward and go into these specialized programs, work hard, be successful, you know, we see charges generally are expunged, you know, taken out, but being put on the registry is like I said, it is not a common practice with juveniles, but certainly it does happen.
Does it look differently if their siblings are like within a year or two apart, if there's not a big gap, or it doesn't really matter?
Well, a lot of it depends, and I'll, you know, have these conversations. Depends on the judge, you know,
Okay.
and depending on what you do, and different judges have the discretion to sentence differently sometimes. But yeah, closer in age, probably not as harsh a sentence. But
Okay.
you know, the legal side of things plays an important role, because the judge can place people in treatment, put requirements on them, so it makes it easier for parents, so they're not having to kind of be the heavy on that. You know, you allow the legal system to handle that, and then they're answering to the judge.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, for people listening, they may not have like had this sibling thing happening, but they have kids, right?
Yeah.
What kind of things would you talk to parents about doing? Because it's not about being a bad parent. It's not about a kid being bad. It's not about them. You know, I weighed heavily before listening to you talk about the pornography and just, you know, having access to so much sexual media.
Yeah.
I just kind of like thought like about it being more related to trauma. What can parents do to be proactive? Because you like you said, like nobody's household is like not is diminished from not having this happen. It could happen to anybody's household. So what would you say to parents?
Be super involved. Be super involved. You know, talk to your kids. You know, one of the statistics that jumps out is when we talk about pornography, the average age now that kids are seeking it out is 10 years old. And so having these conversations about age appropriate, you know, boundaries, you know, not letting people touch you, you know, having a kind of openness to be able to come to you and talk to you about it. And because a lot of times, you know, kids, you know, they want to talk to their parents about some of these issues, you know, but they know parents are super uncomfortable. And, you know, so where are they going to learn about sex? To porn, to their friends. And a lot of times when they're talking to their friends, like they can't think of anybody that isn't involved in porn. So other things that I recommend to do is hey, not, you know, certain things with phones, but having computers and electronics in high traffic rooms, you know, where they're not looking at porn, you know, in their bedroom late at night, you know, monitoring, you know, depending on the age, you know, and what a parent's going to do with phones with their kids, monitoring what they're looking at, how they're texting, you know, what's being sent to them. A lot of porn circulates through group messages among friends. You know, they're like, look at this, look at that. So it's just being really involved. And like what you're talking about, there's no foolproof way. You know, they're good at going around and hiding things, but just trying to be involved and you know, looking for some of those signs, you know. So if you have a feeling in your gut that something's going on, you're usually right. And just explore, ask questions.
A big part is kind of like, being open to having conversation. I'm 38. When I grew up, I think people used magazines. Like that was like the pornography, right? Like was the magazines. There was not as much access to looking at sex like there is now. And I think that, because of like all of the traumatic stories I've heard and been exposed to, I've been intentional about talking to my kids about their body parts. I'm going to put 2 books in the show notes. I can't think of the name of them, but there's like 2 books that really you can just like read it with your kids, because the reality is it's like you can feel like nervous about it or feel like this is too hard. But like Brad said, they're going to go find the information. My age group couldn't just like I thought sex was humping. Like that's how I found the information. Right. But now I can Google, my kids Google like, she was like, how many moms are there in the world? I was like, I don't know. She went to Google to ask Google. Right. So like they can literally Google everything that they want to know. So imagine if you were to have an open dialogue with your kids, they won't have to Google. They can understand like ramifications. They can understand like safetyness around it, healthy ways, because they're going to be 18 at some point. So it's so important to really like be involved. Like Brad's saying, it's really about being involved and being okay with uncomfortable conversations, even if you've never had them growing up.
Yeah, I think it's just that involvement. And one of the things you bring up a really interesting point is, when I was growing up, it was magazines. The thing is now it's unending novelty. Like Gary Wilson wrote this great book called Your Brain on Porn. And it's right there. And so it's that novelty and the effect that it has. And porn is more and more aggressive. The things that are in porn, it's just so rough. And this is what they're saying, and this is what they think sex is. This is what they think a partner wants, and this is what they become fixated on these young brains. I mean, think about a 10-year-old looking at some of this stuff, and like I said, it just really distorts because they don't have real world dating experience as a reference.
Right.
So they're thinking this is cool for guys. This is how a masculine man acts, is what I see in porn. That's how we act. And, we know all the kinds of problems that can lead to and can lead up to sexual offending. Yeah,
good point. Even if it's not about the sibling sexual abuse, I think there's, like you said, sexual offending piece, when you're not involved, when you're not having conversations, when they're left to interpret the world the way that they see it without any dialogue, they're going to create that interpretation. So that's really good. Now, because of all the work that Brad does, he created a book, Sibling Sexual Abuse, which is available on Amazon right now. Tell people about who this book is for and what can they find from this book.
Yeah, originally I wrote this with mainly parents in mind as a guide, and it's really morphed into, it covers really every aspect of sibling sexual abuse. I've got a chapter talking about survivors and what they experience. And really also too, it's a call to action for every one of us that we need to start talking about this. And in the book, I put on the title, like what you said, America's silent epidemic, but it's the world's silent epidemic. And this is one of the last remaining topics that is taboo in our culture and in our really worldwide discourse. And really, it goes through some things that we all can do. And really, my hopes and dreams that we can bring this out in the open, that survivors can have a voice, because we need to hear from them. We need to hear, their stories. We need to know how to help them. And they're the experts on this. We also need to, it's incumbent upon us to rehabilitate these kids that have offended, and so that their lives aren't thrown away, so they don't turn into the Jerry Sandusky's and Larry Nassar's of the world, but that there's a lot of hope for that. And, recent research now, and I cite this in the book, is those adolescents that get into a specialized sex offender treatment program have a 95 to 98% chance of not reoffending and coming back into the system. So there's a lot of hope there. And that's what I emphasize in the book. and hopefully for parents, like I said earlier, this is something that happens. This is a common problem. You're not alone. And as a culture and as a people, like I said earlier, it cuts across all segments. And, we need to talk about it. We need to have ribbons for sibling sexual abuse. We need to have Race for the Cures for sibling sexual abuse. We need to be talking about it so people know where to go, what to do, and people aren't suffering so much in silence. But that we're there to help, and people can come and talk and have open resources and aren't carrying these things for years and years and years. And it causes so much pain in their lives.
That's really good. How as a therapist have you been able to manage and balance, like, dealing with the victims and also the offenders? Because you're teetering between like two roles and holding space, for two human beings that I always say, like, nobody is born and says like, I want to be a drug addict or I want to be a sexual offender. Like and people's like, how do you work with adults? And I'm like, because I can see them as kids. I understand that so many things happen that nobody talks about. So what is it like for you to do both, to kind of do that?
Yeah. I mean, so many of the guys that offend, like you pointed out earlier, were sexually abused. I just really separate the horrible, heinous thing that they've done versus who they are. And that they have that ability to change. And it's interesting as you see all the trauma that they've been through and some of the horrific things that have happened and their ability to change and to see that desire to change. I'd always thought sex offender, Jerry Sandusky, that they're not going to do this. They're just going to continue on and on and on. But to see these people change and go out, lead successful lives, these kids, because they are kids when this happens. And, it's a rewarding work to see families. Nothing feels better than to see those families come back together and say, I never thought that, I'd get my family back, or I didn't think there was any hope for us. And to see those changes, I mean, there's nothing better than that.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that. I think you are amazing. What you're doing, it's hard work, but I think some people may say what I do is hard, but you clearly have found your passion, especially with this book. So if people are looking to learn more about sibling sexual abuse, or if want to think about like what does hope look like, you can find Brad's book on Amazon, right?
That's right.
And you can find Brad on Twitter, right? Anything else you feel like you've left out that would be helpful for people to know?
Just really supporting each other, and really the survivors, I think the parents, and I just want them to have a voice. I want them not to feel so alone. And I think as we do, I've called it an epidemic because that's what it is. We can really have success in fighting it.
Yeah, you can't heal what you don't reveal. So I think the fact that you're kind of leading the way, like you said, you didn't see a book on this. Probably not a lot of people are talking about it. So, people don't know how to deal with this. I think, this podcast episode is going to be good for so many people, right? People who may have struggled through sexual sibling trauma, parents who have kids, parents who may have been in this situation and not know, how to deal with it. And, to my parents that are listening, it's not your fault that you didn't know how to deal with it. Like Brad said, this is something that a lot of people have never really talked about, and there's so much shame. And so I always say it may not have been your fault what happened, but your healing is your responsibility.
That's
right. And so I love your I can feel your hope through the screen. It's so amazing. And I think when you think about the fact that my healing is my responsibility, that can give you hope, where it's what, I know this happened, whether to me or to my kid, but what can I do to reconcile and heal?
That's right.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate you for being here. Now, this is Brad's first live podcast. How did I do? Were you comfortable?
You were amazing. It was great. I really enjoyed it, and really appreciate you taking the time to have me on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
All right. Well, you take care.
Bye. Okay, that was good. So that was a really, I think that can be a like really challenging topic for people. But like you said, like it's a silent epidemic, and just working in the field, I've heard these stories before, and they're not at the forefront. It's not like what people are like talking about. It's not coming up, but that's the kind of foundation for a lot of the behaviors that they're experiencing, a lot of the ways that they haven't been able to kind of move forward. Thank you. This was good. Yes. Brad was very good. He was really good. They haven't been able to move forward in life. And so like, I love his aspect of hope and healing, because we're still here. So if we're still here, I feel like there's room for change. And so if this speaks to you, definitely like think about how you can move forward with your healing process, because I think that's so important. So I appreciate you guys for being here. We'll be back Monday to talk to another guest that's doing something to empower the lives of others. And this will be available on the audio tonight, so you can share it with people that you love. So thank you so much.
Smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging